Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. And today we're going to be talking about Lin Carter, aka Linwood Vrooman Carter, born 1930 in St. Pete, Florida. And the reason we're talking about Lin Carter, aka the King of Trash, is because I don't think he gets his due. I think he's sort of maligned as a subpar author, and that's not unfair. That's not an unfair statement. He's not the best author in the world. But yet, despite not being the best writer, I think his impact upon the subgenre of sword and sorcery fantasy was out of all proportion to his writing talents. And there's a big reason for that. And I've been reading a lot of Lin Carter as part of Garbogust here, as it is Garbogust during this month of the year, the reading event created by Criminali over on his fantastic channel. And rolling into Sumerian September, it looks like I'm going to be continuing to read quite a bit of Lin Carter. And it got me thinking about Lin Carter and about him as an author and as a person, and to attempt to try to find out more information about this figure and what his impact was on this subgenre of sword and sorcery fantasy, and bring it to you guys here on the channel. And it's been an interesting journey, but it's been a difficult one as well, because there's not a lot of personal information on who Lin Carter the person was and the writer. It's been difficult to piece it together. I was not able to find any type of a full bibliography on Mr. Linwood Vrooman Carter. If anybody out there is aware of one, please put it down in the comments section, because I would love to read that bibliography. Unfortunately, I just don't think it exists. So what I wound up having to do is take and piece together various bits of information off of websites out there on the interweb, and sort of put together a collage and build a picture of who Linwood Vrooman Carter was. So let's get into it. Let's jump right into Mr. Lin Carter. Lin Carter, born 1930, St. Petersburg, Florida, but he wound up spending most of his adult writing life on the East Coast in New York and the New Jersey area. And as a kid, he first got his first articles published. He started getting published at the age of 13 years old, when he would send in what was called highly entertaining letters to the pulp magazines that were in existence in 1943, or I should say starting in 1943. And that's when he got his first taste of getting published in a magazine as an author, as a creator of the written word. And I think that probably hooked him and drew him in. Now, he went to Columbia University, and at Columbia University, he attended poetry sessions, poetry classes, or I should say poetry workshops that were taught by Leone Adams. And Leone Adams was a Nobel laureate poet of the United States of America. And these would have been very, very desirable classes to be in, and I'm sure they had a large impact on him as well. From there, he went on and became an editorial consultant. But in between these steps, there was this little thing called the Korean War. And Lin Carter was actually in the Korean War, from what I was able to find out on the internet. Via the various sources of information. He was in the United States Army, he was an infantryman, and he did serve in Korea. That is the extent of his war service that I've been able to find out. And if he was an infantryman on the front lines in Korea, then it's almost certain that he went through all kinds of HE double hockey sticks, because that was a brutal conflict. And it was, if you were on the front lines in Korea, particularly during the opening years of that war, that was going to be some very hard service indeed. And so I thought that was very interesting. I didn't know that of him myself, that he was a Korean War veteran, that he was an infantryman. And I'm sure that that helped him with his writing, that those life experiences translated a lot into his fantasy, and may even be one of the reasons why he enjoyed writing what was essentially escapism, sword and sorcery fantasy. It may also explain some of his personal habits of heavy smoking and heavy drinking, because Lin Carter passes away in 1988, and he dies of throat cancer. Unfortunately, he dies at a rather young age, at the age of 58. And he was a very heavy drinker and a very heavy smoker. In fact, I think it's fair to say that he was alcoholic, and that his throat cancer was brought on by and exacerbated by his heavy drinking and his heavy smoking. But in between there, Mr. Carter managed to have a very impactful career on writing in general, on the genre of sword and sorcery fantasy writing, escapism writing in particular. And he did a lot of things, and he's got a lot of very good books. And when I rate Lin Carter books, I rate them on the Lin Carter scale. And I have to explain that he deserves his own little scaling and rating method, because you can't drop him into the normal 1 to 10 scaling method that you apply to all the other authors and writers out there, because he's just so unique and he's so different in what he writes and how he writes it. So I came up with the Lin Carter scale. And so a 1 on the Lin Carter scale would be The Nemesis of Evil, which is just, it's trash, but not in like the sense of a trashy novel where it's just fun popcorn summer escapism that you read and it's light and it's good. No, this is just straight up trash. Despite the Don Mates, the wonderful Don Mates cover art on here, this is just a 1 on the Lin Carter scale in terms of quality. And then that goes up to a 10 with The Black Star here by Lin Carter, which is very entertaining. This is a highly entertaining book. If I was going to put this out into the real world and rate it, I'd give it a solid 7.5 to an 8. It's well written, it's entertaining, it's got characters that aren't just flat one-dimensional. It has a plot that's fun to read about, and it's a good little piece of summer escapism. So that's the Lin Carter scale there of trashy novels, because he does write trashy novels. But he starts writing, like I said, in 1943. He gets his first taste of getting published in the pulps. And then in 1951, he has a collection of poetry, of fantasy-oriented poetry that's published, that's called Sandalwood and Jade. In 1957, he has his first book published, his first actual book, and that's Masters of the Metropolis. And in 1965, if I remember right, he actually gets very close to winning an award. He gets close to winning a Nebula Award in 1965 with a short story called Uncollected Works. And this gets it gets tagged as a finalist for the Nebula Award for Best Short Story of the Year. And it's the closest that he ever came to winning a literary award. And that's probably fair as well, because his writing wasn't that great. But 1965 is also another big year for Lin Carter, because that's the year that he starts to collaborate with L. Sprague de Camp. And this collaboration between himself and L. Sprague de Camp is going to be one that's going to last for decades. And it's the one that I think really propelled his literary career. And my guess is that in 1965, he published his book, Wizards of Lemuria, which was the first in the Thongor series. And I have a number of Thongor books over here, such as Thongor and the Dragon City, which is, I think this is the second book in the series here. It's not the best book in the world. I did a full review on this. But I think Wizards of Lemuria caught the attention of L. Sprague de Camp. And I'm filling in between the pages here and inserting my own opinions. But this is my opinion. I think he caught the attention of L. Sprague de Camp when he first published Wizards of Lemuria. And then he and L. Sprague de Camp started to collaborate. And in 1966, 1 year after Wizards of Lemuria, he and L. Sprague de Camp, they start republishing the Lancer Ace paperback series for the Conan novels, where they bring Conan back into the public domain, put it back into public consciousness with all these wonderful Ace Lancer series of the Conan novels. Now, they did add their own pastiche stories into there. They did edit some of the original Howard stories with quite a heavy hand, which is very controversial. But without them, I don't think Conan the Barbarian would enjoy the popularity that he does today. He might not enjoy any popularity at all if it wasn't for L. Sprague de Camp and Lin Carter bringing us back these novels, and the fantastic covers by Boris Vallejo and Frank Frazetta that undoubtedly made these things sell like hotcakes back in the 60s and 70s. And so for that, I think we owe him a deep debt of gratitude. But in addition to, being an editor and bringing back these stories and adding his own pastiche stories, what he referred to as posthumous collaborations, he also was a pastiche writer and an editor of H.P. Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith on top of Robert E. Howard. And he helped those novelists also enjoy sort of a resurgence in popularity. In addition to that, in his professional career as an editorial artist, as an editor, there we go, he edited Ballantine books for fantasy stories, and he collected and published anthologies, most notably under his anthology collections called Flashing Swords, where he brought new stories and new authors to the light of the public and brought them out for the public to read. And he kept sword and sorcery fantasy going, along with the help of L. Sprague de Camp, through the 70s and into the 80s until it picked up a life of its own and developed a momentum of its own that kept rolling and sustaining it until here today. And that's why I think, even though he wasn't the greatest writer in the world, we do need to give him his due and just kind of celebrate his life and his contributions to the literary works in a manner that I think it deserves. And as an author himself, he was rather prolific. Starting in the 1960s, he was writing books and he was publishing books for a stretch of about 10 years, where he was putting out almost 6 books a year. That's how prolific he was. Now, they weren't the greatest books in the world, but in there were some real gems. And some of the series that he wrote, of course, were Thongor, where he wrote 8 books for the Thongor series. He wrote 5 books for the Green Star, which this is the first one, Under the Green Star. I just finished this book, and this is a very entertaining book. On the Lin Carter scale, I would give this book a solid 8. It was very entertaining. It's a direct homage to Edgar Rice Burroughs and A Princess of Mars, and he puts an homage to it. He puts an afterword into this book here, where he pays tribute to Edgar Rice Burroughs and Edgar Rice Burroughs' influence upon this book and the series. I do recommend this book and this series if you're a fan of Lin Carter. I don't think it will disappoint you. It basically mirrors almost exactly the basic structure and plot outline of A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I know I'm getting off on a bit of a tangent here, but one of the things that really bothered Lin Carter with A Princess of Mars, when Edgar Rice Burroughs, when John Carter, the main hero of that story, his spirit leaves his body and travels to the planet of Mars, but then it materializes on Mars in his body. And it always bothered Lin Carter as to how his physical body got from Earth onto Mars. He never thought that Edgar Rice Burroughs sufficiently explained that. And so one of his motivations for writing this was to develop that same plot line, that same technique of transporting his hero here, who is never named, off onto this planet that is under the Green Star. And he comes up with what he thinks is a superior explanation as to how this corporal spirit can then manifest itself inside of or I should say non-corporal spirit, manifests itself inside of a corporal body, and then carry out adventures here on the planet under the Green Star. And so that was very interesting as well. But in addition to the Green Star, he also wrote the Callisto series, which was another 8 books, and he wrote the Zarkon series, which was 5 books, this is the first of the Zarkon series, which is Nemesis of Evil. And this is an absolute 1 on any scale that you want to put forward. This is not a good book at all. But then again, it does have this great Don Mates cover on it. And that's Lin Carter. I mean, I have a number of Lin Carter books here. Tower at the Edge of Time. This is a very good novel as well. Here's another copy of Tower at the Edge of Time. And then, of course, you have Thongor books, Thongor and the Dragon City, Thongor at the End of Time, with a very dark, brooding cover on it, Thongor and the Pirates of Tarakas, Hurok of the Stone Age. I need to read this book. This one looks interesting. You have Giants at World's End, which I think this is an anthology? Belmont Swords and Sorcery Science Fiction. Actually, no, it's not an anthology. It's a full novel. The Man Who Loved Mars, which is a sort of a foray into science fiction for Lin Carter. And then finally, I do have one of the Callisto series, Ilana of Callisto, Volume 7 in the Callisto saga. And I do enjoy Lin Carter, and I think it's important to recognize that, yes, he was not the best writer in the world, but he did have a significant impact on the course of sword and sorcery, fantasy writing, and escapism fantasy writing here in the United States of America and abroad. And I think that he and L. Sprague de Camp, primarily through their Conan Ace paperbacks and Lancer paperbacks that they continued to have published, I think they sustained that genre through a time when otherwise it might have faded out and be nowhere near as important and as large as it is today. And for that reason, I wanted to give Lin Carter his due. And with that, I'm going to wrap this one up and say take care, be safe, and I'll catch you guys next time.